An earnest ministry, the want of the times. Motives to earnestness and the indispensable necessity of it. First, it is demanded alike by the theme and the object of it. When Pilate proposed to the illustrious prisoner at his bar the question, "What is truth?" he placed before him the most momentous subject which can engage the attention of a rational creature. And if Christ refused to give an answer, his silence is to be accounted for by the captious or trifling spirit of the inquirer, and not by any supposed insignificance of the questions, since truth is the most valuable thing in the universe, next to holiness, and it is truth that is the theme of our ministry, even that which by way of eminence and distinction is called the truth. Take any branch of general science, be it what it may, and however valuable and important it may be considered, its most enthusiastic student and admirer cannot claim for it, par excellence, that supremacy which is implied in the definite article, the truth. Who shall adjust the claims for this distinction between the various sciences of natural and moral truth, and declare which is a rightful possessor of the throne, against the false pretensions of usurpers? Who? The God of truth himself. And he has done it, and placing the Bible on the seat of majesty in the temple of truth, has called upon all systems of philosophy whatever to fall down and do it homage. This is our subject: eternal, immutable truth, truth given pure from its divine source, and given with the evidence and impress of its own omniscient author. Oh, what are the loftiest and noblest of the sciences? Chemistry, with its beautiful combinations and affinities, or astronomy, with its astounding numbers, magnitudes, distances, and revolutions of worlds, or geology, with its marvelous and incalculable dates of bygone millions of ages, to the truths of revelation. What is dead, inert matter, with its laws of materiality, however diversified, classified, or combined, compared with the world of mind, of souls, of immateriality and immortality, and with the laws of moral truth by which they are regulated? What is nature to the God of nature? What the heavens and the earth to the glorious mind that looks out upon them through the organ of vision, as from a window that commands a grand and boundless prospect? What the fleeting term of man's existence upon earth, with its little cycles of care and sorrow and labor, compared with the eternal ages through which the soul holds on her course of deathless existence? The works of creation are a dim and twilight manifestation of God's nature, compared with the grandeur and more perfect medium of redemption. The person of the Lord Jesus Christ is itself a wonder and a mystery, which shall shine all other displays of deity into darkness. This is the Shekinah in the Holy of Holies of the temple of God's creation, towards which, as they bend over the mercy seat of his work of redemption, all orders of created spirits, from the most distant parts of the universe, reverently turn and do homage to the great God, our Saviour. This is our theme, the truth of God, and concerning him the truth of an incarnate deity, the truth of man's redemption by the cross, the truth of the moral law, the eternal standard of rectitude, the tree of knowledge of good and evil, the truth of the gospel as a tree of life in the midst of the paradise of God, the truth of immortality and of heaven and of hell, the truth couched under the symbols of the Levitical law and the predictions of inspired prophets, and fully exhibited in the Gospels of evangelists and the inspired letters of apostles. Again I ask exultantly and rapturously, What are the discoveries of Newton or of Davy or of the inventions of Watt or Arkwright compared with these? Viewing man in his relation to immortality as a sinful and mortal agent. What is art or science compared with revealed truth? And can we be otherwise in earnest in the promulgation of this truth? Shall we touch such themes with a careless hand and a dronish mind? Shall we slumber over truths which keep awake the attention and keep in activity the energies of all orders of created intelligences, and which are the object and the resting place of the uncreated mind? Let us look at the earnestness with which the sons of science pursue their studies, with what enthusiasm they delve into the earth, or soar on the telescope to the heavens, or hang over the fire, with what prolonged and patient research they carry on their experiments, and pursue their analysis, how unwearied in toil, how enduring in disappointment they are, and then how rapturously they hold up to the world's gazing and wondering eye some new particle of truth which they have found out, after all this peering and prying into nature's undiscovered secrets. Ministers of the gospel, it is thus with the men who have to find out the truths of nature. And shall we, who have the volume of inspired, revealed truth unopened before us, join and loiter and trifle over such momentous realities? Shall the example of earnestness be taken from him who analyzes man's lifeless flesh, to tell us by the laws of organic chemistry its component parts, rather than from him who has to do with the truths that relate to the immortal soul? Shall he whose discoveries and lessons have no higher object than our material globe, and no longer date than its existence, be more intensely in earnest than we who have to do with the truth that relates to God and the whole moral universe, and the truth that is to last through eternity? What deep shame should cover us for our lack of ardor and enthusiasm in such a service as this? And then what is the purpose for which this truth, so grand, so awful, so sublime, is revealed by God and to be preached by us? Not simply to gratify curiosity, not merely to conduct the mind seeking for knowledge to the fountains where it may slake its thirst. No, but to save the immortal soul from sin and death and hell, and conduct it to the abodes of a glorious immortality. The man who can handle such topics, and for such a purpose, in an unimpassioned, careless manner, and an icy heart, is the most astounding instance of guilty lukewarmness in the universe. To his self-contradiction no parallel can be found, and he remains a fearful instance how far it is possible for the human mind to go in the most obvious, palpable, and guilty inconsistency. A want of earnestness in the execution of that commission which is designed to save immortal souls from eternal ruin and raise them to everlasting life is a spectacle which, if it were not so common, would fill us with amazement, indignation, and contempt. We have read the speeches of the great masters of eloquence, both of ancient and modern times, and have read also of the intense anxiety and untiring effort with which they have sustained by corresponding efforts the mighty periods that flash from their burning souls. And do we condemn as enthusiasts the Athenian orator who thus agonized to save his country from the yoke of Philip, the majestic Roman who roused the indignation of the Republic against the treason of Catiline? Or William Wilberforce, who for 20 years lifted his voice and appealed to the justice and mercy of a British Parliament against the atrocities of the slave trade? On the contrary, we deem no eulogy sufficient to express our admiration of their noble enthusiasm. But our panegyric upon them is a condemnation upon ourselves. For how far short of them do we fall in earnestness, though the salvation of a single soul, out of all the multitudes that come under the influence of our ministrations, is an event, which in its consequences is inconceivably more momentous, because enduring through eternity than all the objects collectively for which these men exhausted their energies of their intellect and life. Do we really believe that we are either a savor of life unto life or of death unto death to them that hear us? Or is this mere official phraseology which is never intended to be understood in its ordinary import? Is it a matter of fact or only the solemn garnish of a sermon? The trickery and puffing up pulpit vanity that souls are perpetually rising from beneath our ministry into the felicities and honors of the skies, or dropping from around our desk into the bottomless pit? Our companies of immortal spirits continually immigrating from our congregations to colonize eternity, to people heaven or hell, to swell the numbers of the redeemed, or to add to the multitude of the lost? If this be true, and we are gross deceivers, mere pulpit actors, reverend hypocrites, if we do not believe in their truth, then where is the earnestness that must give consistency to our professions, and which is appropriate to our situation and adequate to our convictions? Have we really become so carelessly, so criminally familiar with such topics as salvation and damnation that we can descant upon them with the same calmness, coolness, not to say indifference, with which the public lecturer will discuss one of the minutest branches of natural philosophy? Oh, where is our reason, our religion, our consistency? Number 2, earnestness is imperatively demanded by the state of the human mind, viewed in relation to the truths and the object just set forth. This is glanced at in an earlier part of the work, but must now be resumed and amplified. The entreating and beseeching importunity employed by the apostle, and which are found to be no less necessary to us, presuppose on the part of its objects reluctance to come into a state of reconciliation with God, which must be assailed by the force of vehement persuasion. Although we have to treat with a revolted world, a world engaged in mad conflict with omnipotence, yet if the guilty rebels were weary of their hostilities, and in utter hopelessness of success were prepared, on the first offer of mercy, to throw down their arms, and in the spirit of contrition to sue for pardon, ours would be an easy mission, and we might spare ourselves the trouble of earnestness and expostulation. But the very reverse is the case. The carnal mind is enmity against God, and is not subject to the law of God, neither indeed can be. The hearts of men are fully set in them to do evil. We find them taken up, occupied, influenced, governed by the palpable and visible things of the present life, and our business is to engage them in a constant resistance of the undue influence of the things which are seen and temporal, and to do this by a vigorous faith in things that are unseen and eternal. Our aim and our labor are, by the power of the unseen world to come, to deliver them from the spell of the present state, with whose pageantry they are enamored, and under whose fascination they are well pleased to continue. And then, apart from, or at any rate in connection with this, they are so occupied by the pursuits of business, so engrossed by the cares, the comforts, and the trials of life, engaged in such breathless haste to pursue, such distracting bustle to possess, and such ardent hope to enjoy the various objects of their earthly desires, that when we call their attention to serious religion as the one thing needful, we are as one who would stop another in a race to offer him an object foreign to that for which he is contending, and who by the competitor for the prize is deemed intrusive, impertinent, and obstructive. But the difficulty doesn't stop here. If this were all, we should have only a very small share of the opposition which now calls forth our energy and requires our most strenuous efforts. For when we have succeeded in gaining a hearing and arresting attention We have to contend not only with an indisposition to receive the truth, but a determined hostility against it. We have as our first business to fasten a charge of guilt upon men, naturally disposed to think well of themselves, to produce a sense of utter worthlessness and depravity in those who, in the utmost lengths to which their concession will go, admit only some few imperfections and infirmities, to displace a feeling of complacency by one of self-condemnation and abhorrence, and to substitute for a general and unhumbled dependence upon divine mercy such a conviction of exposure to the curse of a violated law as makes it difficult for the trembling penitent to see how his pardon can be harmonized with the claims of justice, to offer salvation upon terms which leave not the smallest room for self-gratulation or the operation of pride. Indeed, to carry such a message as frequently excites disgust and calls forth the bitterest enmity of the human heart, and arms all its passions in determined hostility. And then the salvation exhibited in the gospel is not only opposed to the pride, but to the passions of the soul of fallen man. It requires the excision of sins dear as a right hand, the surrender of objects which have enamored the whole soul, the breaking up of habits which have grown with our growth and strengthened with our strength. Sometimes we have, in addition to all this, to summon our hearers to a war without, as well as a conflict within, and to verify the words of Christ, that he came to send a sword instead of peace, and to set parents against children and children against parents. What minister has not sometimes felt his very courage ready to quail, and his steadfastness in danger of faltering when called to lead on some persecuted convert to brave the cruel mockings and reproaches, the frowns, the threats, and the violence of his nearest and dearest earthly connections? I agonize as I write to think what I, among others, have witnessed of this kind. Verily, it is through much tribulation that some, even in these peaceful times, are called to enter into the kingdom of heaven, and then to follow on the difficulties of the Christian ministry, to prevent the first impressions of divine truth from vanishing like the cloud or exhaling like the dew, to guide the anxious inquirer from finding repose anywhere but at the cross of Christ, to guard the feeble and to inspire the timid with courage, to detect the deceit of the heart and to aid the novice in breaking off from besetting sins, to inspire the resolution to crucify the flesh, and to stimulate the soul to an ever onward progress in sanctification, to meet the epidemic malady of our nature, which assumes so many shapes and appears under such a variety of symptoms, with a proportionate and well-adapted variety of treatment, to help the believer to beat down his foes under his feet, and amidst all his various trials, temptations, and difficulties, to continue steadfast, immovable, and always abounding in the work of the Lord, notwithstanding the counteracting influence of much unremoved corruption in his heart. All this must require in him who has to do it earnestness of the most collected and concentrated kind. To carry on the ministry of reconciliation in this revolted world, with the intention and desire of recovering its inhabitants from sin and Satan unto God, when the opposition to be overcome is considered, must appear to every reflecting mind the most hopeless of all human undertakings, apart from the promised aid of the Holy Spirit. It is this alone that could induce us to continue in the ministry another hour. Without this agency, we must retire in utter despair. But then, even this is not to be viewed, much less expected, apart from human instrumentality, and man's earnestness is that very species of instrumentality which the divine agent employs. It is not the feeble ministrations of the lukewarm and the negligent that God blesses for the conversion of souls, but the heart-breathed, fervent wrestlings of the ardent and the diligent, He makes the winds his messengers and flames of fire his ministers. Here, then, is a double argument for earnestness and the difficulties which are to be subdued in the accomplishment of our object, and the cooperating agency of the Spirit of God. The former shows its indispensable necessity, and the latter encourages us to put it forth. Without it, we cannot look for the aid of the Spirit, and without the aid of the Spirit, it would be exerted in vain. May we be able to take a right view of our obstacles and our resources. Number 3, consider the aspect of the times as affecting the human mind and the objects of our ministry. The view which has been just given of the difficulties that lie in the way of the faithful minister applies to all countries and to all times, inasmuch as the depravity of human nature is coextensive with the race of man. But still there may and do exist circumstances in one age and country to give greater force to these difficulties, which are not found at any rate to the same amount in others. The features of our own age are strikingly impressive, and in no small degree hostile to the success of the gospel and the prevalence of evangelical piety. The sphere of human pursuits, whether we consider the active or speculative departments, is filled with unusual energy and excitement. Earnestness is a characteristic of the age. If we turn our attention to trade, we see men throwing their whole soul into its busy occupations and laboring as if their salvation in another world depended upon their success on earth. What ardor of competition! What rage for speculation! What looking about for novel schemes, and what eagerness to embrace them when offered! What hazardous and reckless gambling do we see going on all around us! And saying nothing of the multitudes who, instead of plodding onward in the beaten path of regular trade, endeavor by watching the stock market to make a bound to wealth. How engrossing are the pursuits of secular business in these days of large returns and small profits. Think of the consumption of time and the absorption of soul, which are necessary to maintain credit and respectability, and also the strength of religious principle, which is indispensable to follow the things that are just and true and honorable and of good report. How many professors are in danger of being carried away? How many are carried away by the tricks, artifices, and all but actual dishonesties of modern trade? And what but a powerful and energetic ministry can be expected to rouse and help God's professing people to bear up against and to keep in check, much more to subdue this sordid and selfish spirit? What could be sufficient but an intense devotedness on the part of ministers to make things unseen and eternal bear down the usurping power of things seen and temporal? Who but the man that knows how to deal with invisible realities and wield the powers of the world to come can pluck the worldling from the whirlpool of perdition, which sucks down so many in the torrents of earthly mindedness, or prevent the professing Christian from being drawn into it? If our own minds are not much impressed with the awful glories and terrors of eternity, we shall not and cannot speak of these things in such a manner as is likely to rescue our hearers from the ruinous fascinations of mammon. How in such an age we seem to lack a Richard Baxter, and a Thomas Doolittle, and a Jonathan Edwards, and a John Howe, and a George Whitefield, to break in with their thunder upon the money-loving, money-getting spirit of this grossly utilitarian age. Then think of the engrossing power of politics. What a spell has come over the popular mind from this source, since that tremendous outburst, the French Revolution. For more than half a century, the potency of this subject has been perpetually augmenting, till the rustic of the village, as well as the merchant of the city, the recluse student of the cloister, no less than a man of the exchange, have alike yielded themselves up to the fascinations of the newspaper, now accommodated not only to every party in politics, but to every creed and religion, and at the same time cheapened down to almost the poorest member of society. This is a matter neither of surprise, nor, provided it do not thrust out other and still more important matters, of regret. It is but the constitution of our country developing the energies of its popular element. The people are claiming their share of power and influence. May they prepare themselves by knowledge and piety to exercise it rightly. Inside of this, will anyone deny that we want an earnest ministry to break in some degree the spell and leave the soul at liberty for the affairs of a kingdom which is not of this world? When politics have come upon the minds and hearts and imaginations of the people for 6 days out of the 7, invested with the charms of eloquence and decked with the colors of party, when the orator and the writer have both thrown the witchery of their genius over the soul, how can it be expected that tame, spiritless, vapid commonplaces from the pulpit, sermons without either head or heart, having neither weight of matter nor grace of manner, neither genius to compensate for the want of taste, nor taste to compensate for the want of genius, and what is still worse, having no unction of evangelical truth, no impress of eternity, no radiance from heaven, no terror from hell, in short, no adaptation to awaken reflection, produce conviction, or save the soul. How can it be expected, I say, that such sermons can be useful to accomplish the purposes for which the gospel is to be preached? What chance have such preachers to be heard or felt, or what claim have they amidst the high excitement of the times in which they live? Their hearers too often feel that in listening to their sermons on the Sabbath, as compared with what they have heard or read during the week, they seem as if they were turning from the brilliant and tasteful gaslight to the dim and smoking spark of the tallow and the rush. Another characteristic of our age is an ever-growing taste for elegance, refinement, and luxurious gratification. We cannot wonder at this, nor if it be kept within proper bounds greatly regret it. It is next to impossible that the progress of art and the increase of wealth should not add to the embellishments of life and multiply the sources of tasteful enjoyment. But then, just in proportion as we multiply the attractions of earth, is our danger of making it our all, of leaving heaven out of sight and learning to do without it. This is affecting the church, and the hardy and self-denying spirit of Christianity is in danger of being emasculated and of degenerating into a soft and sickly effeminacy. Elegance and extravagance, luxurious entertainments and expensive feasts are beginning to corrupt the simplicity that is in Christ, and amidst sumptuous buildings, gorgeous furniture, costly dress, and gay equipages, professors of religion are too much setting their affections on things that are upon the earth, and turning away from the glory of the cross to the glory of the world. Who is to call them off from this pageantry and make them by God's grace feel how vain are all these things? Who can set up a breakwater against the billows of this ocean of worldly mindedness and guard the piety of the church from being entirely swept away by a flood of ungodliness? Who but a pastor that can speak in power and demonstration of the Spirit? A man who shall rise Sabbath after Sabbath in the pulpit, clothed with a potency to throw into shadow, by his vivid representations of heaven and eternity, all these painted nothings on which his hearers are in danger of squandering their immortal souls. Akin to this is a continually augmenting desire after amusement. A love for pleasure, diversion, and recreation is an appetite evidently increasing, for which there are those who are ever ingenious and ever busy to furnish a supply. Religion is no enemy to rational enjoyment, even though it be not strictly spiritual, and they who can supplant the low and vulgar sensualities on which the multitudes have fed by a more refined and elevated taste, even if it should not rise into the element of religion, are doing a service to their country and to their species. But still, a taste for amusement, both mental and bodily, may be carried too far, and many foreseeing and deeply reflective minds are of the opinion that it is going too far now. There cannot be a thoughtful mind, one that looks upon our sojourn in this world as a probation for eternity, but must reflect with serious alarm and grief upon the endless devices which are suggested by the wisdom that comes from beneath, to hide from mankind their duty and their destiny as immortal creatures. It seems as if by common consent mankind were striving who should be most successful by inventing new kinds of diversions, and blotting from the mind all considerations of eternity. Pleasure taking as a rage of the day, a taste which has been excited into a hungry appetite by modern transportation. Before this desolating influence, the sanctity of the Sabbath, and with it, of course, the prevalence of religion, are likely to be destroyed. It may be said that anything is better than the alehouse and the gin shop. Well, this is freely admitted, but it may be questioned whether some of the modern stimulants to pleasure do not lead to, and not from, these scenes of iniquity. The people, it is affirmed, must have recreation. Be it so, but let it be of a healthful kind, and let the great aim of all who have any influence upon the public mind be to endeavor to implant a taste for the recreations afforded by cheap and wholesome literature, by quiet home enjoyments, and above all by the sacred delights of true piety. In such a state of things, what kind of ministry is it that is wanted? The answer is easy. Men of earnestness, of earnest intellects, earnest hearts, and earnest preaching, men whose understanding shall command respect, whose manner shall conciliate affection, and whose ministration shall attract by their beauty and command by their power. The accessibility of the laboring classes gives us an advantage in approaching them. Neither prejudice nor fashion bars us out from them. We have neither to scale the walls of bigotry, nor to silence or evade the dogs of angry intolerance. The door is open, and we may walk in. But we must be men of the age, men who understand it, who are, to say the least, up with it, and know how to avail ourselves of its advantages, and to surmount its difficulties. Let us not deceive ourselves by substituting anything else for this. It may be all very well and proper in its place to keep pace with the times in which we live, as regards other matters in classical, mathematical, and philosophical literature, in academic degrees and tasteful architecture. But these things, in the absence of a living power of intense devotedness, will be but as the flowers which shed their fragrance upon our grave, or as the sculpture which decorates our tomb.